and welcome to the endocrinology series of lectures. So in the last lecture you have understood about the different types of endocrine cells. Their origin could be epithelial or it could be neural as well. And we have also discussed and started with the hypothalamus. So you must remember that what is a hypothalamus? It is a neuroendocrine structure which is lying just below the thalamus, and how it remains connected with the pituitary gland with the help of a stalk called as infundibulum. Then we have studied that the hypothalamus itself is made up of some nuclei which are the aggregates of neurons, and there are different nuclei which release different neurohormones to regulate different physiological functions of the body. Thereafter, we studied about the pituitary gland, and there are two separate lobes of pituitary gland, the anterior and the posterior lobe, and what are the hormones which are released from these two lobes of the pituitary. And now we will continue with the pituitary, and we will understand that how hypothalamus and pituitary remain connected with each other. So, there is a hypophyseal portal system in the pituitary gland. So, as you know that each and every gland or any organ remains supplied, it receives supply from the blood. So, what happens in case of pituitary gland? So, there is a portal system. So, in case of portal system, the blood supply is different as compared to the other blood supplies. What happens in case of portal system is that blood flows from one capillary network and enters into the portal vein, and then now it will not enter into the heart, rather it will enter into another network of blood vessels before entering into the heart. So this is what happens in case of portal system, whereas in case of other organs we observe that there is a branch of artery bringing blood to a particular organ and then taking the blood back through a vein, and then it will take the blood supply to the heart. But the situation is different in case of portal system. So in your body you have studied about hepatic portal system, and now we are interested in understanding the hypophyseal portal system. So in case of hypophyseal, now you are aware that hypophysis is pituitary. Now in case of hypophyseal portal system, the blood flows from the capillaries in the hypothalamus which enters into the portal veins, and these portal veins will carry blood to the capillaries of the anterior pituitary. Now let us understand this with the help of the examples and figures. So in this figure you can see that there are number of hypothalamic neurosecretory cells. There are axons, and the axon terminals are ending to this network of the blood vessels. Now this network of blood vessels is again forming a portal vein, and these portal veins are forming another network of capillaries. Look at this figure. So here you can see that this region is what is referred to as median eminence. So this median eminence lies at the base of hypothalamus, where the primary plexus or the primary network gets formed by the blood vessels. Here you can see that it is the primary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system. Here you can see that all the arteries I have encircled in red color. So there is the entry of blood through superior hypophyseal artery, and then there is inferior hypophyseal artery as well. Now let us have a look at the veins. What all veins are taking the blood back? So here you can see that there are posterior hypophyseal veins shown in blue circle and blue colored blood vessels, and then there are anterior hypophyseal veins as well. You can also look here in the basically there is no encircling, but these are the hypophyseal portal veins shown in blue color. So you need to understand that this is the primary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system, and it is then forming another plexus which you refer to as the secondary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system. And this portion where this portal system secondary plexus is being formed is the part of the anterior pituitary. In case of posterior pituitary, you see that there is no connection with the primary plexus. It is receiving blood supply from inferior hypophyseal artery, forming a network here which you called as capillary plexus of the infundibular process, and then bringing the blood towards the posterior hypophyseal veins. So this is what is hypophyseal portal system. So these neurosecretory cells which sits in the hypothalamus, they produce and secrete some of the hormones. If you want to understand the function of these hormones, so for your ease you can divide them into releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. So the neurosecretory cells of hypothalamus release 5 releasing types of hormones and 2 inhibiting types of hormones. The function of the releasing hormones is to stimulate the secretion of the anterior pituitary hormones, whereas inhibiting hormone, the name is suggesting that it will inhibit and suppress the secretion of the anterior pituitary hormone. Mark my words, anterior pituitary. We are not talking about posterior pituitary here. So there are neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus which are producing 2 different types of cells. The releasing ones will stimulate the secretion of pituitary gland, whereas the inhibitory hormones will inhibit the secretion of the anterior pituitary cells. So let us zoom this thing to understand in much more detail. So you have understood about the somatotrophs. We have discussed in the last lecture that these somatotrophs produce growth hormone, human growth hormone, or HGH, also referred to as somatotropin. So this is regulated by the GHRH, which is also referred to as somatocrinin. So this is growth hormone, releasing hormone. You pick this word, releasing hormone. Whenever you will find something like hyphen with releasing hormone, that means it is getting secreted by the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus. So there are growth hormone releasing hormones, and then what are the inhibiting ones which will inhibit the secretion of growth hormone would be somatostatins, also referred to as growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So these are 2 secretions of the hypothalamus which regulates the somatotrophs secretion, which is somatotrophin. Now let us talk about thyrotrophs. The thyrotrophs, we have understood that they produce TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, also called as thyrotropin. This gets stimulated by thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, whereas it gets inhibited by the same hormone which we have just studied about with regard to growth hormone, that is somatostatin. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone has the capacity to inhibit the secretion of both somatotrophs as well as thyrotrophs. Now let us have a look at these gonadotrophs. What regulates gonadotrophs, which were producing LH and FSH, both of these hormones. So these gonadotrophs, if you look here, are stimulated by gonadotropin releasing hormones, GnRH, which are released by the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus, but you will find out there are no inhibitory hormones in the hypothalamus. Then if you look at the lactotrophs which were producing the prolactin, these get stimulated by prolactin releasing hormone, and then there is prolactin inhibiting hormone to inhibit the secretion of the lactotrophs. So this prolactin inhibiting hormone is also referred to as dopamine. So this PRH and dopamine regulates the secretion from lactotrophs. Now let us talk about these corticotrophs. The corticotrophs were able to produce ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, also called as corticotropins, and melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH. So these basically are regulated and stimulated by CRH, which is corticotropin releasing hormone, while MSH gets inhibited by the prolactin inhibiting hormone, dopamine. So these are different neurosecretory secretions which regulate the secretion of the pituitary gland. So earlier you were aware that the pituitary gland is what is referred to as master gland, but now we are aware that even the secretion of this pituitary gland is regulated by another neuroendocrine organ sitting above it, which is hypothalamus. So I hope now you are able to appreciate that how these neurosecretory cells are regulating each and every cell of the anterior pituitary. But you might be wondering that what about the posterior pituitary? What regulates the posterior pituitary? We have discussed a little bit in the last lecture. Now let us discuss this thing in a bit detail. So there is this hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, which is made up of the axons of hypothalamic neurosecretory cells. The nerve endings of these tract directly reaches up to the posterior pituitary. So they will extend from different nuclei of the hypothalamus. It could be paraventricular or supraoptic nuclei, and they extend up to the posterior pituitary. So there are these hormones which are synthesized in the cell bodies of these neurosecretory cells. They get packaged over there in the secretory vesicles, and they will move down, travel down the axon and reach to the axon terminals. And whenever there is any kind of stimulation, there will be nerve impulse that will trigger the exocytosis of these vesicles, which will release the hormone in the posterior pituitary. So here you can see with the help of a diagram that there are these cell bodies of neurosecretory cells and how their long axons are entering into the posterior pituitary. And this is what is referred to as hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So now I hope you have understood that how the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, they both are connected with each other, and how intricately they are regulating the secretion of their glands. So now let us conclude this topic by understanding about the disorders because of the pituitary gland hormones. So you can see in this image there is a very short-statured person which deliberately have been made to stand along with a very tall person. So both of them hold Guinness Book of World Records, and you can see here that the person which was extremely short in size was suffering from dwarfism, which occurs because of the hyposecretion of the growth hormone during the growing stages of life. So when the growth phase is there, if there is deficiency of growth hormone, it would slow down the bone growth, and what will happen is the epiphyseal plates will close much before the normal height is attained. So this will lead to a short stature of a person, but it can be prevented if get diagnosed at a right stage. It can be prevented. What you can think of is 100% correct. You can administer the growth hormone, but it should be before closing of the epiphyseal plates during the childhood stage. Now let us understand about the another person who was extremely giant. So that person was suffering from pituitary giantism, whereas there was hypersecretion of the growth hormone during the growth years. So because of that, there will be abnormal increase in the length of the bones, but you can see that this growth is uniform. Even you look here, even the hands of the person were quite big, along with the long bones of the legs, the arms, the entire sternum. If you see, everything is long. So this is a condition referred to as pituitary giantism. Now, what will happen if this growth hormone starts to increase in much more amount during the adulthood stage? Once the childhood phase is over, what if there is any kind of tumor in the cells which are producing and releasing the growth hormone? In that situation, another condition arises which is called as acromegaly. So the primary difference between acromegaly and this pituitary giantism is the duration at which the hypersecretion of growth hormones takes place. So giantism will occur when the hypersecretion of growth hormone is during the growth years, while if there is hypersecretion of growth hormone during adulthood, it would lead to acromegaly. So you can understand that now the childhood phase has gone over. So there could be no increase in size, because definitely the epiphyseal plates would have got closed. So the person cannot increase in height. Then what happens in case of acromegaly is there is enlargement of the bones of hands, feet, your cheeks, the eyelids, lips, tongue and nose. They start getting enlarged. The jaws start to get thickened. The skin gets thickened, and then there are certain furrows that develops over the forehead, below the soles of your feet. But there will be no increase in the long bones. The length of the long bones will not increase. So this is what is acromegaly, and you should be able to differentiate between giantism and acromegaly. Now let us have a look at a disease caused by the hormone of the posterior pituitary. So till now we have discussed the disease associated with growth hormone, a hormone of anterior pituitary. Now let us talk about vasopressin. There is a disease named diabetes insipidus. I hope you must have heard of this disease. Now this occurs when there is defect in the ADH receptors, that is vasopressin receptor, or the cells are unable to secrete ADH. So either case, just as you have studied for diabetes mellitus as well, that either insulin is not getting released in the body because of which the blood glucose levels are getting elevated, or the other thing could be that insulin is getting released in our blood, but the receptors of insulin are not responding. Likewise, any of these cause the insufficiency or absence of ADH or defect in the receptor of ADH could lead to diabetes insipidus. Now let us understand more about this disease. This diabetes insipidus in turn is of two types. One is neurogenic diabetes insipidus, which occurs when there is decrease in the secretion of ADH. Now, when can this condition arise? So, it can arise if there is any kind of damage to the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus which were producing ADH, or if there is any kind of damage in the posterior pituitary, because it is the posterior pituitary from where the ADH has to be released. And any kind of damage could be because of several reasons, including trauma to the head or any kind of brain injury during which the damage has occurred. So this leads to neurogenic diabetes insipidus, wherein you will see the deficiency of the hormone. Now, how can this be treated? So it's quite easy for you to imagine that if there is deficiency of a hormone, you replace it. So you should know that this hormone gets replaced. You inject the hormone in the body if there is deficiency, and it is a life-saving hormone. Now let us talk about another type of diabetes insipidus, which is nephrogenic. So nephrogenic word refers to kidneys, right? So the previous one was neurogenic. Now this one is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. In this case, the kidneys are not responding to ADH. That means there is the issue is with the ADH receptors. Now these receptors have become non-functional, or the kidneys have become damaged. If you could recall, we have seen in the previous lectures that kidney is one of the target organ of the ADH, because this hormone primarily functions by acting as antidiuretic. So it has to conserve water whenever there is dehydration or in any condition like that. But imagine a condition when ADH receptors are not responding. So this condition is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, and it becomes quite complicated now to treat because now we cannot inject the hormone. The hormone is already there in the body. So what is suggested here? It's quite a complex type of treatment is done in this situation, and generally it is suggested that salt restriction could be done in the diet. But the symptoms, if you see, for the nephrogenic as well as the neurogenic diabetes insipidus, the symptoms are similar. So you relate to the function, you look at the function. I have just told you that what is the function of vasopressin. It is acting on the kidneys, and then it is conserving the water and thereby reducing the loss of water through urine. So if there is diabetes insipidus, now there will be no antidiuresis, because of which there will be excretion of more volume of the urine. And you can imagine if we keep on urinating, what condition can arise? It can lead to dehydration, severe thirst, and in case of children you will observe bedwetting as well. So that is why I have used word that if there is neurogenic type of diabetes insipidus, this ADH or vasopressin is injected into the blood. And that is why I have used the term it is for life saving, because if one person can die because of dehydration in this situation. So this is about the diseases associated with the pituitary gland. So we have talked about the acromegaly, we have talked about the giantism, we have discussed how dwarfism can occur, but we have also understood that if these diseases are there, their treatments as well exist. So if there is any kind of deficiency of hormone, one way of treating is to replace the hormone. The situation becomes critical if the receptors stop responding to the hormone. In that situation, multiple ways of treatment has to be brought into picture. So you have talked about you have understood about a very important diabetes, which is diabetes insipidus, wherein we have understood the major role of vasopressin. If you could recall the last lecture, I have also shown that this vasopressin acts on the arterioles. So on the arterioles, it basically acts and compress them, which increases the blood pressure. So the body, any change in the body blood volume or water balance, if it gets up or down, then the signal is sent to the vasopressin, and this is how vasopressin plays a role. So this is all about the hypothalamus and pituitary. So I hope the entire structure, how these structures, what are the neurons present in the hypothalamus, what different parts of pituitary and what are the different cells present in the pituitary gland, how the secretion of the pituitary gland is regulated by hypothalamus, what is the blood supply of the pituitary, and then you have studied about the different hormones produced by different types of cells in the anterior pituitary, and how posterior pituitary is producing vasopressin, oxytocin. Lastly, we concluded this topic by understanding various diseases, including pituitary dwarfism, wherein a person becomes short-statured in height under the deficiency of growth hormone. We have understood the difference between the acromegaly and giantism, the primary difference being the time at which the over-secretion of growth hormone is. So if the growth hormone is getting secreted during childhood, if it is getting secreted in excess during childhood, it will lead to giantism, while in case of adulthood it will lead to acromegaly. And lastly, we have understood about diabetes insipidus, which is one of the types of diabetes The others being diabetes mellitus, gestational diabetes. We will study about these as and when we will talk about the particular gland. So in case of diabetes insipidus, we have discussed about two types of diabetes insipidus, which is neurogenic diabetes insipidus and nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So we have seen that in case of neurogenic diabetes insipidus, because of any kind of trauma or surgery of the brain, if there is any kind of damage in the posterior pituitary or hypothalamus gets damaged, it will lead to decreased production of ADH, and this is treatable by injecting the hormone back into the body. But in case of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, we have seen that kidneys do not respond to the ADH because of the issue with non-functionality of the ADH receptors. So the treatment becomes quite complex, but both types of diabetes insipidus show similar type of symptoms, including excess loss of urine, which leads to dehydration and eliciting thirst response. So this is all about hypothalamus and pituitary. Thank you so much.